everyone, my name is Mahan and I'll be doing the fall 2019 midterm as my coding time. So we could just get straight into the question. Right here it says that we are given a string list of the top 100 books downloaded, and it gives us these 4 attributes for every book, and it is asking us first to retrieve the data. And then the next 3 questions is just asking us to manipulate the data with some different functions. And then after that, we'll split it and then create a table. So in order to complete the first question, so let's just start off by creating a variable called bookstring. That's what it says right here. Variable named bookstring to retrieve all the data from text 1. So there, bookstring. So the way that we retrieve data is you just type in document dot, and then first you get the form. So it says right here we're getting form 1. You're calling the form, and then you call the text. So right here it says text 1, and then you do dot value. So we just answered the first question, retrieving the data. So the next thing we are going to do is replace all the periods with a comma in this string. So the way that we're going to do that is first we have to look in this text area and see, like, okay, what we're trying to do is every time we find a period, we are going to replace that with a comma. And so there's a period after every rank. And the way that we can do that is by using a while loop. And so what the while loop does is that it will, whatever condition we put in the parentheses, it will keep on running until that condition is no longer true. So the way that we can structure this so that we're just finding every instance where there's a period is we can do while bookstring dot, and then we'll use the index of method. And what the index of does is whatever parameter you put inside those parentheses, it will just go through the variable, like this variable right here, and find every instance, like find the instance of it. So we're trying to find the instance of the period, and we want it to be there. So with index of, if something is there, it's going to return a 0. If it's not there, it's going to return a -1. So we want it to be there. So that's why we're using this to filter through and find every instance. So we're going to use the not equal to operator and say not equal to -1. So this is going to keep on running until this statement is no longer true. Then the while loop will stop running. And so what is going to run when this while loop is true? That is where we're going to use the replace function. So we're going to call bookstring, and we're going to do bookstring dot replace. So with the replace function, you're going to put in 2 arguments. The first argument is going to be the original value that you're trying to replace. So for us, we're trying to replace the period, and we're replacing that with a comma. So we're going to put the new value in the second argument and the old value in the first argument. And then you just end it with a semicolon. And so with replace, it'll only run, like, it'll only find the first instance. So in this case, it's only going to find this first period, and then it's going to replace it with the comma, and then it's going to stop. So that's why we put it in a while loop, because the while loop is what keeps, that's what makes the statement run over and over again until it's no longer true. So once we completed that, we have finished the second question. The third question is asking us to replace all occurrences of the string by with a comma in the same bookstring variable. So once again, we can use that same logic with the while loop, bookstring dot index of. Now the way that Dr. Parks included this word by, you can see if you highlight it, there's a space before and after. This is because we're using the word by, that is separating the title of the book by the author. However, in some cases, like if you execute it, this is what we're trying to have as our output. If you execute it, there are some instances where the word by is in in another word. And we're not trying to get that instance of by. We're just trying to get the instance where it's the word on its own. So you have to be careful to include that space. So you're saying the index of by is not equal to -1 because we're trying to make sure that it is there. Then we'll replace book string. So once again, you put in 2 arguments. So space by space, and you replace it with a comma. And then we have completed the 3rd question. So now let's move on to the 4th question, which is really similar. Replace all the open parentheses with a comma in book string. So we're going to do while in this variable, we're indexing to find all instances of the open parentheses. And we want to make sure that it exists while we're completing this condition, or while we're performing this task. And then if it is there, then we will do replace. All right. So with that being said, we have completed the first 4 questions of the first deliverable, or the first 4 deliverables of the first question. Okay, so now it's telling us that the resulting string will contain data for 100 books separated by the closing parentheses. So basically what we just did with these while loops is we took every instance that there's a period and we replaced it with a comma. Every instance of the by, we replaced it with a comma, and every instance of the open parentheses and replaced it with a comma. So now in question 5, it's asking us to split the data on the closing parentheses. So the way that you do this is by using the dot split function. So you'll make a new variable and you're going to call bookstring and you're going to use the split method. And what you input into your split method is what you want to split it by. So we want to split it by the closing parentheses. And what this does is when you split something, you basically create a new entry whenever, like at whatever area you split it. So before this closing parentheses, this is all one entry, and then it splits, and then this becomes another. It's like it creates a separate array for every group before the closing parentheses. So using the split function is very common. Usually, like you'll split by either a semicolon or a comma, something like that. But we just did question number 5. All right, question number 6, this is where we're actually going to start building our table. So it says create a table with 4 columns and 100 rows as follows. So the first thing it says that he gives us the heading row. In his answers, the row is actually called head 1 and not heads. So if we did assign it to head 1, it wouldn't, if we assigned the table to heads, then it wouldn't have the right output. But we know that we're going to make a table, so we can open up a table tag and we're going to create a border of 1 and have cell spacing. So cell spacing will equal 0. All right. And then we also, so if you look later down in the question, it tells us that we are going to be placing the total number of books downloaded for the day. So we are going to have to do a count, or like a sum of all these downloaded books right here. So we can create a variable for that as well. So we'll just call that variable downloads and set that equal to 0. All right, so we opened up our table right here, and the way that we're going to include the heading, like this head 1 that he already made for us, all you do is you do OS, because that's what we assigned to the table, and you're just going to add the head 1. And so we did do this first section. And then now we're going to start building the rows and columns. So whenever you're building a table in JavaScript, you always start off by opening up your table, And then the next thing you do to make the rows and columns, because we are working with multiple rows and multiple columns, is we're going to use a for loop. So we do start out making the row. And so you do for I is equal to 0, I is less than something, I plus plus. So what is I going to be less than? So basically, if you look at your output, every row has, every row is basically equivalent to one of these entries, right? Because you have your rank, title, author, and number of downloads. So when we did this variable x dot split, we basically split this entire thing into 100 different entries. So we're going to do I is less than x dot length. That way it'll make a row for every single entry, and you won't go over like 100. It'll go up to 100 rows. So we have the rows, but before we can input the rows into our OS, we are going to split one more time this entry, because you see, like, these are 4 different elements that are part of one entry, and we want to split that so every like piece of it has its own cell. So we're going to split it one more time, and we're going to create a variable temp, and that's going to equal to x dot split. And what are we going to split it by? So remember earlier we separated all these things by commas. So that way when we split it by the comma, each piece before will have its own, it'll have its own like place. So we will be splitting it by the comma. And you see this x dot split is like only splitting, like it's going to only split this, and it's only going to split this. It's not splitting like this entire text area again. So now that we have split it even further, we are going to open up our row. So you do that by doing plus equal to, and then you do a tr tag. All right, so we just opened up a row, so now we got to open up the columns. And the way we're going to do that is really similar to how we opened up the row. We're going to use the for loop, and we're going to do j is equal to 0, j is less than something, and then j plus plus. So what would j be less than? So for every column, as you can see here, every column has rank, title, author, and download. So it has 4 things. And we just did x dot split into 1, 2, 3, 4 things. So it would make sense to do j is less than temp dot length. So that's basically equivalent to like j is less than 4. Because every column is only going to be part of either the rank, every cell is either going to be under the column of rank, title, author, or downloads. And don't forget, this is a nested for loop within the original for loop that you made your rows in. And so once you open that up, you can just do os is plus equal to, you open up a column tag by doing td, and then you're going to add it, you can do a plus sign, and we're going to put temp j here because we're actually going to put the value that's at that location. So like temp at 0 would be the rank, temp at 1 would be the title, Modest Proposal, temp at 2 is Jonathan Swift, and temp at 3 is 1496. So we're basically creating a cell right now. And then you close it like that. All right, so once we have closed our column, we made our cell, we can close our row as well. All right, and so let's go back to the deliverables it's asking. So we have the rows and then we have the cells. So now it's telling us place a total number of books that are downloaded for the day. So we have this variable downloads, and if you just do the plus equal to, that's like adding. You can do downloads is equal to downloads plus, or you could just do downloads plus equal to. I feel like this way is a bit easier to read. And the thing that you would be adding up is everything that's in the downloads column, right? So remember in JavaScript, when they count things, they always start by 0. So rank is 0, title is 1, author is 2, and the downloads is 3. So over here, we're going to do temp at 3 because we only are focusing on the downloads. But this is actually incorrect. Like, this is right, but there's still a missing part of it because in HTML, like on this web page, all of this is a string. And the only way that you can do like this addition stuff is if you convert it into an integer, because you can't add strings and numbers together. So we're going to do downloads is equal to parse int, which basically takes your string variable, whatever's in this parentheses, and converts it into an integer. And that's how you would add that. And we're doing this in the scope of the first for loop. So now we're going to leave that for loop and we're going to close our table. All right, so we close our table and now we want to display this total downloads right here. So we're going to do we're going to create a break tag. And then we're going to input this download value. But we have to use the toString method because when we're displaying it on this web page, we do want it to be a string. So we're going to convert it back into a string, whatever that value was. And that's basically it. The last thing we're going to do is put the results on the div block. So you do that by saying p1 underscore out dot inner HTML is equal to the OS. All right, so we completed the first question. Let's just copy and you don't want to put it here. You want to make sure that you keep the tags that he made for the heading, and you'll just paste it and make sure head 1 is there. Yeah. So now we'll save it. And then you open it up in a browser and we have the total downloads and we have the table and we have it matching his heading. So that is the first question completed. So now we can move on to the next question. All right, so the next question is, let's go back to here. All right, so the next question is like not super difficult. There's not a lot of code, but yeah, we could just get right into it. All right. So it's giving us a table right here and a text box where a user will input a number, and that text box is called SZ and it's located in the form F2. So what we're going to do is we're going to retrieve whatever that value is that they put, and if the value is even, then we're just going to have an alert display and it's going to say that the size must be odd, and then set the P2 out to an empty string. But if they input an odd number into this text box, then we'll produce a table that has the same number of rows and columns as what the number that they put in. And then if the cell is in an odd number row or an odd number column, then we're going to do all of this stuff, like these 3 things. But if it's not, then we're just going to create an empty cell. So this is to kind of format for these things right here. So basically what it looks like is if we put the number 13, it's going to do a 13 by 13. And if we do like the number 4, it's going to tell us that the size must be odd and give us an empty string. So let's start by answering the first question by receiving the data or the text that they gave us input. So we're going to do SZ is equal to document. The form is F2 and the text is SZ. So F2.SZ.value. However, this part is not complete yet because we're going to be working with this number to make our table. And remember, when people put stuff in here, this is being put in as a string. So we do need to do that parse int again, like how we did in the last question, so that we will be working with an integer value and not a string value. So we just did the first question. All right, so the second question is saying if the value is even, then we're going to do these two things. So if SZ, so how do we determine if something is even? He did put a note in here that if something, and then you do this mod function,